The idea of video game remakes started sometime in the mid-70s, although the definition of them progressively changed as time went by. They started off mainly as conversions, like a reprogrammed version of the original game, or porting an arcade game into a home console like Space Invaders. The concept of remakes has since progressed into being a complete revision of the original game, while maintaining its core aspects. The first Resident Evil is an ideal example of that. Not only was it faithful to the original, it enhanced the game in every way possible. It added new areas, enemies, characters, story elements, and game mechanics. The surge of video game remakes in recent years is heavily credited to its success and critical acclaim. 17 years later, Capcom would go on to release the remake of RE2 and later RE3 and RE4. Now, 3 of these remakes were heavily praised and well received by most fans, with the exception of one. You guessed it, the remake of Resident Evil 3. The main purpose of remaking a game is to modernize it with newer technology while also introducing it to a newer generation. You also fix some of the issues the original game had and improve upon it in general. The remakes of 1, 2, and 4 may be better or worse depending on your point of view, but there's no denying they still improved some areas of the originals in the newer games. Not only was the remake of RE3 inferior in every way, it wasn't faithful to the core aspects of the original game, nor did it improve any major aspects of the original in the remake. But I'm not here to talk about the faults and flaws of RE3 Remake. That topic's been said and done, and there's nothing new I can add to it really. I'm here to talk about the wasted potential of Resident Evil 3 Remake.
This video contains spoilers for Resident Evil.
To elaborate on what I mean by potential, when it comes to remakes, the thing I look forward to the most isn't the newer graphics or modern gameplay, but rather the parts they add, improve upon, or fix. And improving doesn't mean something is flawed necessarily, but you can always upgrade something as well. And the remake of the first Resident Evil is proof of that. As I mentioned earlier, the remake was a total overhaul of the original, which was made easier by the fact that this was the first vision they had for the game while developing it, but were held back by hardware limitations. Resident Evil games are generally shorter than your average game, which made it harder to sell in the earlier days. But Capcom solved that issue by incentivizing replay value, like adding 2 different storylines with different characters. It was a smarter way to have difficulty options, while also giving the player a different experience for their second playthrough. But the remake expanded even further on that by adding extra post-game modes like Real Survival, a challenging mode set to the hardest difficulty where item boxes are no longer connected, and oh yeah, your auto-aim is also gone, and invisible enemies, which is pretty much as you might guess. The remake also expanded on the game's story and lore, like the mansion's architect, George Trevor and his family's tragic backstory, and his daughter Lisa, who was an added boss. It introduced new game mechanics like defensive items or needing to burn zombies so they don't come back as the newly added Crimson Head's enemies. It turned optional rooms into mandatory ones while being much more detailed, forcing you to explore more of what the mansion had to offer. And you can't forget the various rooms, areas, and puzzles they added that made the game feel more complete. It heavily enhanced the original while maintaining and improving the main elements that made it shine in the first place. Resident Evil 2 made the dual character system much better by making each character more unique to one another. It's an A and B scenario now instead of just difficulties. Your characters will get different weapons and challenges. They will encounter separate bosses and characters, and they will even go to distinct areas altogether. Sadly, the 2019 remake heavily missed the mark with this. While the second or B scenario still has the true ending and the actual final boss, they weren't that different to each other. Instead, you just had different beginnings and endings to the game, key items are moved to different places, and the puzzles require other solutions. They also removed the zapping system altogether, a mechanic that can make your first or second playthrough easier or harder depending on your choice. When you get to the locker room, you're presented with a submachine gun and a pouch for your inventory. Whatever you don't take will be available for the B scenario, allowing you to decide how well equipped you are for each playthrough. You can also just take both and screw the B scenario over. Despite being overall inferior to the original, I still think the remake managed to improve on several things. The sewer section got a total overhaul. It's much bigger, more in depth, and multi-layered compared to the original. It also has a new enemy type, the G adults, which are technically just a Birkin 1 or G1 fight from the original, but still, it was a nice new addition. Granted, they did also cut the spider enemies in the remake. Getting to the sewers itself is also much better. Instead of taking a short path through the parking garage, you travel a great distance, deeper and deeper, to reach the lowest depths of the city. In a way, it symbolized how deep Umbrella's connections and power are rooted within Raccoon City. The pacing of the bosses was also improved. The gap between Birkin 1 and 2 is too short in the original, which makes it stand out less. They're more spaced out in the remake, which makes them more of a big milestone in the game instead of just back-to-back fights. The biggest improvement of the remake is easily Mr. X. In the original, he only appears in the B scenario, and while it's true that does make the B scenario more unique, the addition of him in both playthroughs not only amplified the suspense of the game, but it added several layers of challenge. You can't just casually walk through the RPD station without a care, since you've got rid of most of the zombies. He's constantly chasing you through it, making even the simplest tasks like opening a door or moving a bookshelf intense. They turned him into a true nemesis in the remake. Both the Ada and Sherry segments were also significantly better. The original had both segments nearly identical, with you only having to push some crates around to get a key. The remake had each segment separate, Cherry having to navigate through an orphanage while being chased by the Twisted Chief of Police, and Ada running after Annette to learn where the G-Virus is, which also added more depth to the story. I'm not saying the segments were perfect, but they were definitely much better than their original's counterpart. Both the remakes of 1 and 2 modernized the games with newer hardware, but also worked on improving upon the original work, which is what I think a remake should always aim to do. The remake of Resident Evil 3 was sadly poorly dealt with. Not only was it unfaithful to the original's core aspects, it barely worked on improving anything from the original. I have many issues with the remake, but as stated before, we're here to talk about the wasted potential from the remake and not its issues. But if you're curious, I can give you a quick rundown. Downgrading Nemesis from a menacing threat that chases you through the entire game into barely anything. Removing the clock tower, the park, boss fights, puzzles, the choices system. Making it more linear. Shortening the Raccoon City parts. And making Carlos go to the RPD instead for some reason. They also made the game have way less replay value. They removed the mercenaries, and the 2 puzzles in the game had the same solution for every playthrough, and there were no different endings either. Unless you want to count the game over screen you get when you somehow manage to miss Nikolai, which I've only seen speedrunners do. Now back to my main points. RE3 is the third and last game of the Raccoon City trilogy. The first game takes place in the outskirts of the city, where it's mentioned once or twice, but you never really see it. While the second game does take place in the city, you only see little glimpses of it, as you're going to the police station or heading to the sewers, but nothing too big. RE3's main identity is that it's mainly about Raccoon City. After 2 games, you're finally seeing the city at its full scale. Its people, streets, and everything that's been destroyed by the virus. The original shows this very well, but this could have easily been improved on. It should have been even more open and less linear, allowing you to explore so much of the city and witness the effects on its remaining survivors. The options of where you can go and explore are limitless. This is supposed to be a large city with hundreds of thousands of people. To only show this much of it is such a wasted opportunity that the remake should have expanded on. The fact that Requiem showed more of the city than the remake is just absurd. There's also the choices system, which hasn't really been done in other Resident Evil games besides this, and as good as it was in the original, this, again, could have easily been expanded on. For example, when Nemesis finds you in the newspaper agency, you can either hide from him or jump through the window. If you jump through the window, you get to a little alley you can only access through this choice. But it's just a small alley that doesn't change much or give you anything, so it's okay if you miss it. The remake could have easily had more unique areas like these you can only enter by making specific choices, which would incentivize people to play the game again and explore every nook and cranny. One of the reasons why it's harder to have replay value for games these days is because everything can easily be looked up online. Instead of replaying a game to see the other ending, you can easily just look it up on YouTube. But if the replay value is good and unique enough, you will get people replaying the game to explore everything it has to offer. Even though it's a short sequence, I love Jill's return to the RPG in the original. I get why they didn't want to extend this section too much since it was reused assets from the previous game, but this is the only time you ever see any of the original star's members from the first game go into the RPG station where they actually work. To not have any kind of moment of reminiscing as she goes into her old office for one last time, or never meeting any of her old colleagues felt like a missed opportunity. I know the city is in shambles, but based on the timeline, there should have been remaining officers in the building still, and those interactions would have been great. This was an easy part the remake could have executed, but instead, you get whatever the hell we got with Carlos. The park section from the original also could have been much better in the remake. Compared to the other environments you usually explore in Resident Evil, it's more unique and they should have done more with it. As far as improvements, the remake did technically make a few. The hospital section is longer and more in depth than the original, and allowing Jill to explore the hospital was also a nice touch that rewards the player for their backtracking. Jill meeting Kendo was a great addition and makes a lot of sense, considering he develops the STARS unit's weapons and is a long-standing ally. But sadly, there aren't that many improvements besides those. It's hard to talk about the minor improvements the remake made when the cons heavily outweigh the pros. With the recent announcement of Code Veronica's remake, I really hope they focus more on fixing mistakes the original had, and enhancing the game in general instead of just modernizing gameplay and controls. I'm way more interested in flawed games being remade because there's so much room to improve on things opposed to an already polished game. As much as I love Code Veronica, it is quite flawed with so much the remake hopefully will fix, but that's a topic for another video. But also a game can be perfect for its time, with room for improvement still. Despite how amazing Resident Evil 2 was for its time, I think the zapping system was seriously underused. The first time being the locker room I mentioned earlier, and the other time is near the end of the game. A secret room you can only access by inserting both characters' fingerprints. Meaning if you missed it as character A, you have to redo the entire game from the start. You literally have to beat the game twice just to access this one room, and what do you get from it? The just okay submachine gun you've already used. To build up one room with this much expectation and requirement and waste it on that is such a letdown, which again, the remake could have easily done better. It sucks that Capcom dropped the ball with Resident Evil 3 Remake, because I truly think that if it was done well, it could have been easily one of, if not the best Resident Evil game. And that's the wasted potential of Resident Evil 3 Remake. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Zyth, and I'll see you next time.